about the Good Fire interface. So I'm excited to see what you guys are working on and what you produce in this hackathon. So I apologize that very few of actually none of my examples come from Good Fire. Some are from Neuronpedia. A surprising amount of them are just like ones I produced locally a very long time ago because I was making the slides in a rush. So I can see Tom said that's okay. Cool. We can go in question time to the interface and do some things maybe. So I'll just explain a bit about me and then we'll get going because I made the mistake of making way too many slides. Just quickly, who am I? My name's Joseph. I just started running the mech-interp team at the UK AI Safety Institute. For those of you who don't know, this is the biggest AI safety institute in the world. It was started about 1.5 years ago, and the institute does research and informs policy and international agreements, things like that. Before that, I wrote SAE Lens. I suspect some of you have used SAE Lens. I worked with Johnny on Neuronpedia. It's very sad to leave Decode research and Neuronpedia to join AZ. That's how great AZ is. And I'm hiring, so I'm gonna be trying to sell you guys on that at the end of the talk. Moving on, I think there are like 3 takeaways that I would love you guys to have at the end of this talk. The first is that there's a difference between feature phenomenology and latent phenomenology. So phenomenology is this term, I think Anthropic brought it in recently, but it predates Anthropic, of doing like qualitative, looking at qualitative insights in your science to inform your overall ideas about the theory about what's happening. And I think I want to distinguish here between features and latents. So latents, we'll go into the details of this in a sec, but just understanding whether what you're looking at is a byproduct of your method or whether it's a byproduct of the underlying stuff to be studied. The second sort of key takeaway I want you guys to have is that, and this really came to me while I was making the slides, I suspect the phenomenology might be very useful for working out how to reprogram AI systems and use SAEs to do cool things. I think there's a lot of hints about what might go wrong or what you might be able to take advantage of in the kind of phenomena you see associated with SAE features, in the kind of qualitative analysis you can do of them. Lastly, and I will probably only speak about this for like 2 minutes, I think there's a huge number of routes for mech-interp and model internals work to impact AI safety. I think I'd be happy to talk a lot about that in questions time. I'll probably just like list a huge number of things, and you guys should follow up with me afterwards if there are particular things you want me to talk more about. So I'll encourage you guys to put anything in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on it. Arcana, maybe feel free to interrupt me if I'm like missing stuff in the chat. Cool. Does that make sense? I guess that was a very high level details. Does anyone have any questions before I get going? Just anything sort of major. Okay. What are SAE features? Like what actually are they? Like you can train an SAE, but what is it? I think we don't talk about this enough. So I've got like this dashboard I made here where you can see max activating examples on the right. You can see positive logits, negative logits on the left. I've assumed you guys are all familiar with this kind of stuff. If anybody's not familiar with dashboards and things like that, let me know. Yeah, I think this is a cool feature. This is a feature that fires on questions. Well, is it a feature that fires on questions? So like, if you look at the positive logits, it looks like it's promoting question marks. And you're like, okay, well, when you're in a question, you should have a question mark. But it seems to like, and maybe this is an issue here with the highlighting, it seems to fire sort of from when it's clear there's a question being asked until the question mark. And it's not clear to me, like, is this the model tracking that it's in a question? Is it the model predicting a question mark? Is there just no difference between the two? This is like a flavor of the kind of thing that I want to get at today. And I hope by the end of the presentation, you guys will feel like you have a lot of conceptual tools to answer this question. So we'll come back to this. But feel free to like think about it as we're talking, as I present different ideas. So the first section, which don't get too panicked. It's really about all the issues with SAEs and having an understanding of like what SAEs can and can't tell you, and what are the hints we have so far about maybe how we can improve them. So some of you may be aware that there's been a move from talking about SAE features to talking about latents being like the neuron in the SAE, and features being properties of the input or the internal representations that you're trying to tag. I will be very careful in this presentation to talk about SAE latents as a separate thing. Distinguishing between a feature as in an internal representation of a property of the input or the property of the input itself is something that maybe I'll do a worse job of. But I think we should also be trying to distinguish this. And I think, I'll talk a little bit in this section about what are the assumptions that make SAEs sort of less useful. I think these are like the degree to which these cause problems will be clear when we try to use SAEs for different things. Okay, so I come from computational biology, so I feel like it's very natural to say like, okay, you have like some property of the input to a complex system. So maybe if you're a cell, this is like the amount of lactose around you. And then in response to the lactose, you will like make lactase, and maybe the amount of lactase will track the amount of lactose, right? So the protein is tracking the amount of now, obviously, this is not really a measurement system, but you could see how like the enzyme level might track the level of this chemical outside the cell. And then you could go and you could take those cells, you could ask how many proteins are there in that cell, and maybe you come up with the method for pulling out those proteins, and you see how many you get, and then that gives you like an estimate of like how much of this protein. This is like not the worst way to think about like SAE latents and features and internal representations. So I think you can have a feature, and that can be any property of the input, like a token starting with a letter. And then you have, presumably the model tracks this. The model needs to track this because the model is, the model is doing lots of complicated calculations, and it has internal variables, and they're tracking properties of the input. I think they also track properties of the output. We'll get to that. And then when we train an SAE, we're making a bunch of assumptions about what those objects inside the neural network look like, and we talk, and it's so like built into our assumptions that the SAE latents are tracking the real underlying object in the internal representations that we for a long time didn't distinguish between features and latents. But I would say an SAE latent is that component of your SAE that you think corresponds to a feature. Does that make sense to people? I can't see people. I'm just gonna assume like comment if you have a question. Yeah. Also feel free at any point to sort of take a vote on like go faster or go slower. All right. So this is important context, and we're going to start to talk. The next section will really depend on understanding the difference between latents and features. So what makes SAEs imperfect? I don't want to go into a super great deal of detail here, but I think this is like important to understand, and it's a lot about what latent phenomenology I think is like the phenomena associated with like your system for tracking the internal variables. Like you've got latents, those are your measurement system. If there are phenomena, you want them to be phenomena that are properties of the system that you're studying, not properties of like that you've created or results that mostly come from your methods. This is a bit of a subtle distinction, but we'll see in practice. So SAEs are a sparse linear decomposition. Why does a sparse linear decomposition work? Well, more or less the residual stream or other sort of activations can be fairly well summarized as a sum of like vectors. Now, the extent to which that is not true will maybe cause issues for SAEs. And let's go into details there. So here's an example of a result from a really cool paper from the Tegmark lab, where I think some of you will have seen this. But the basic idea is that if you take these features that are tracking days of the week, so they'll fire on like Wednesday or Thursday, Friday, and you look at the sort of the vector space that they jointly map out using a PCA, just with the contributions of those features to the reconstruction, you see like these circles, like these like days of the week or months of the year. And they titled this paper "Not All Language Model Features Are Linear," which doesn't make any sense if you don't have a separate word for latent or features. So like because the SAE latents are linear, like by definition. So here you can see that like there's an underlying object here that can be somewhat well described using a set of SAE latents, but there's clearly an overall structure that is not linear. Now, the thing to highlight here is that like it's actually kind of hard to find examples like these, and for the most part, you really do. It really does seem like it's just a sum of linear components. But this is important because this is an example of, I guess, both a latent phenomenon, but we can kind of get a vibe here that this is like really how the underlying structure works, and that like there really is, but because we understand that the days of the week, go around in circles. So that's a phenomenon about the reality that's being reflected in the internal representations, which comes through in the latents. Okay, so we also say that SAEs are sparse. So this particular example is from an investigation I did with my laser scholars this year, where we were looking at like spelling features. So like a first letter is A, and you can see here that this latent here seems to track or like fire on tokens that start with the letter A. If you guys like click on this link, you can see there's a whole app where we try to demonstrate this. But like one of the outcomes of that investigation was that when you train SAEs of different sizes and with different sparsity levels, the likelihood of you finding a latent that's like very good at this task like varies dramatically. So there's something here where like we think the model's representing this, but it's very, very dependent on the size of the SAE, the sparsity of the SAE, whether you actually find a latent that corresponds to this. This is like something that Anthropic highlighted when in towards monosemanticity with this notion of the microscope zooming in and zooming out. But it's a really big deal if you're like trying to do engineering and you're trying to like maybe engineer with respect to some variable. If it may well be represented in the internal representations, but you may or may not have a latent that tracks it. And I think that's a really important sort of thing to consider when you're doing work with SAEs. Like, not any given SAE will necessarily represent any given thing. It might split it up, and that might be bad, or it might not track it. There's a lot of work around this, but I think like worth considering if I was trying to do really engineering applications of SAEs, like actually having a good reason to believe the thing that I think might be represented by the model is represented by the model. You can demonstrate that the model has access to some kind of information by making it like by showing that it can perform well at tasks that require that. Like we know that this model can spell because we got it to do spelling, and we showed that the latent space contained linear representations of this by training linear probes. Whether or not this came through in the SAE was like highly variable, and I think that's a phenomenon of the SAE. That's a latent phenomenon. It's like not really like a statement about how the model spells. It's a statement about how the microscope is giving us insights into the model. More generally, there's a sense that I get that investigation made a more specific point about when latents appear to classify something. So like let's say they track something that starts with the first letter. Sorry, I'll just respond quickly to this question. So, does it depend on how well the SAE was trained, or is it sometimes just not possible? That's a really good question. So if a model doesn't represent something, then there should be no way for the SAE to retrieve it. It would be interesting for like someone to try to show that like we know the model doesn't represent X, and then like there's no SAE that finds it. If an SAE found something that we knew the model couldn't operationalize, that would be quite interesting. But in general, like um, this isn't really about how well the SAE was trained, in my opinion. It's more about SAEs being um, just like fundamentally like when you have a microscope and you zoom into the right level, then an object at a particular distance will be like seen clearly. And if and for different objects at different distances, you would need to tune it to resolve those clearly. SAEs are kind of similar. It's like less that the microscope has a scratch on it, and more that like just fundamentally the microscope needs to be tuned. Um, you could argue that like an alternative SAE architecture just wouldn't need this kind of tuning. Does that answer your question, Milu6? I should go back this slide. Okay. I can see a couple of other people typing, so I assume there might be a question coming up. Yes. So uh, DY has asked if there are alternate Arcana. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I probably don't have enough time to take the question in real time. I will quickly answer that alternatives have and are being explored, especially a lot of runtime optimization things. So like there's a DeepMind post where they mention this. Okay, so another latent phenomenology thing here is that not only is there feature splitting where like a larger SAE finds more nuanced features, there are cases where like features kind of overlap. Like a starts with L classifier will sometimes like not fire on words that start with L because there's another feature that fires on those words that will like track the starts with L information. And this I think is also a latent phenomenon. It's a bit more complicated, so you should read the paper. It's called feature absorption. Um, yeah, the last thing about SAEs that you should sort of be aware of that's maybe a latent phenomenology thing is this idea of they're actually kind of data set dependent. And there's a really cool blog post recently from Connor Kassane that shows that if you like try to find a refusal feature and you don't train on like chat data, that you like it's much harder. Like here they trained like if you take the pile, which is not a chat data set, and you look for your refusal direction, you get like a 0.6 cosine similarity between like the closest feature, whereas you could get 0.85 if you had trained on a chat data set. Okay, so in summary, SAEs are imperfect microscopes. So some of the phenomenon, some of the things that you see associated with SAEs are properties of the system doing the measuring, and they're like artifacts of like the assumptions we're making. Um, and maybe this comes from the assumptions, but sometimes we can still see, and actually most of the time we can see a lot of interesting things regardless. But we should try to be sure that those things are properties of the actual system we're studying and not properties of the SAEs. So that brings us to the next section. I'll try to move slightly quicker now. Um, Basically, SAEs show a huge amount of evidence of very interesting things. I think this might be very useful from the perspective of like trying to reprogram models, trying to do various things that are important for AI safety. So the first thing is about this logit weight distribution, which is basically like the direct effects that latents have on the sampling probabilities. I think this is like understudied, which is why I want to talk about it. Um, I think there's like the pattern of like when features fire, there's like very sort of distinct qualitatively different things that you can see. When I say features, I should be saying latents. Um, but like presumably if the latent is correctly tracking the feature, then this is just about how the model represents when and where the model represents things. And then lastly, a bit of discussion about structure between features. Um, and I don't think I was planning in my original thinking for this talk to emphasize this like difference between the um, latent phenomenology and feature phenomenology earlier than this. But like you should think about each of these as we go through. Like, how would you know that this is not like some artifact of your SAE? Um, all right, so we've got this question. What's this feature? Like what really is it? Well, we can see when it fires. we can see what tokens are promoted. And there's nothing here that tells you about its relationship to other features, but we will get to that. So these distributions in blue and red are basically, so it's a histogram over tokens. And so like the most promoted tokens are like on the right here, and the most down promoted tokens are on the left here. And there's actually very different distributions you can find here in SAE latents, where if you look at their click on my logo to be able to see which slide I'm on. Yeah, so there's this bimodal distribution you can see. This seems to be like features that like split the data set between like the next token is like lowercase and doesn't have a space, or like uppercase and has a space. This like evenly divides the token distribution. This one's like more about like down promoting tokens that seem like to appear in the middle of words. This one seems just to promote the set of tokens that are all capital letters. So like without even looking at where these features fire, if you just look at their effect on the sampling probabilities, you can see like very qualitatively different things. And you can try to plot like the statistics of the distributions of these projections. So like the skew and kurtosis of those logic weight distributions. And you can see some interesting results. This was a GPT-2 small. I think like getting good results on a bigger model might require a tuned lens, where you like apply an affine transform to see how they're affecting the sampling probabilities correctly. But one of the things that we found here is that like tokens, like the size of this like right tail here, yeah, so like latents seem to promote tokens in groups. So like maybe it's like all the things that start with the letter A, or all the things that are like related to data processing. And that like phenomenon is quite interesting, and it like seems like those sets of tokens really correspond to like groups of things that you and I can reason about. And because they're groups of things that you and I can reason about, it seems plausible that this is really a property of what the model's like reasoning about, and maybe less some artifact of the SAE. So I think this is like quite interesting. I think you guys should like look into this in many cases. For example, here, this is a latent that corresponds to like cringeworthy things, and it's from Gemascope, and you can see it promotes the puke emoji. And you know, it's got this like right tail of all these like words that it like promotes, and you can like steer with it. And it's kind of contexty. We'll talk about what that means later. But it's definitely got this like skew, this like right tail in the tokens it's promoting, and it's great for steering. It just like totally makes Gemma talk about cringy things. So like here it's telling a story, and we turned like cringeworthiness up. And he's like, it's been weird. I've missed you terribly. There's forced cheesiness, expository cliche. It's sort of like cool how we've got this like latent that seems to track this very human notion of cringe. And my vibe is like how I thought, like I saw this latent and I had a feeling it would be really good for steering with, and the reason was because of this tail here, and also because of the contextiness of like how much it fires consistently. So let's talk about like contextiness. So like some latents seem to just like fire on like one token in a prompt. So you'll see here just the token 2 and then nowhere else. Some will like fire from some condition until some condition. So this one just like fires from an open bracket to a closed bracket. Call this a local context feature. The term comes from a time when we weren't distinguishing features and latents. I think it really is a local context feature and not just a local context latent. But I think this is like fascinating. I think if you're doing logic over like you're trying to decide when you want to steer, like this sort of feature might be quite useful. But in general, the more contexty, the more like a feature just seems to fire on like every token in a context, those tend to be better for steering. Possibly because they tend to track concepts that are easy to steer on. And like maybe there's some like subtle reasoning here we need to be careful of. But you can see here it has both the like the skew in what's being predicted. So this is what I was talking about in the logic distribution stuff. But it's also just like firing very, very consistently on capitalized text. And in general, if you're looking for features that are good to steer with, like contextiness is like one of the best sort of indicators I found for like features being useful to steer with. Um, this is a feature in GPT-2 small that I really don't like, so I'm probably going to go off it fairly quickly. But it's like promoting sort of like a combination of like words to do with. I mean, there's rape at the top there, but it's like yeah, it's like almost a sexual violence feature. And the reason I raise this is like I would love to track every time a model came across anything like this, or any time a model was like going to produce any text associated with this. So like it could be that like features that reliably track something, whether it's tracking context in which something is present, or just instances of a thing, may be very useful for like monitoring. Um, yeah, okay, so let's talk about structure between features, which is this other like phenomenological thing. So you guys will be familiar with towards monosemanticity. The idea with feature splitting is that like some feature in like a smaller SAE will have like multiple features corresponding to it in a larger SAE, and so on and so forth. You do sometimes get merging. I think merging is really bad. I think merging, like if you have like a tree data structure, but like it can't actually be a tree because sometimes you have instances of things merging. This I think makes it harder to. You kind of have to represent it as a graph. But then a lot of people have tried to investigate this and found that it's quite tricky. Um, no one can see the slides. You have to like follow the link and then click on my name, and you will see what slide I'm on. Discord isn't working. Um, um, okay, so wait. So towards semanticity showed that this was a thing that you saw with SAEs, but didn't really distinguish whether like there's an underlying object here that is like real in the activation set, or like like would this exist independent of SAEs? I think the answer is like kind of obviously yes. You can completely show this without SAEs. Um, but like importantly, SAEs are supposed to be a decomposition. You can decompose SAE features into more features. This is the meta SAE concept. Sorry, latents into more latents. And I think that phenomenologically, that's actually a very big deal as well. Like the fact that we can do that at all suggests that like the single decomposition just like really isn't right. That there's either a lot of sort of like they're a very long list of objects with like a lot of structure between them, or there's like some better or well described structure that maybe where it's sort of approximating with like a closer and closer linear approximation with like more and more features. Um, so I think this is phenomenological in the sense that like it doesn't have to be this way. Features don't have to cluster. You don't have to be able to decompose SAE latents into other SAE other latents that are interpretable. Um, yeah. So to recap, there's like qualitatively interesting things in the logit weight distributions of the direct effects. Maybe those can help us understand how to steer better, which latents are better for steering, what they're actually doing, maybe more specifically than just looking at where they're firing or sampling from the model while steering with them. There's there's quite interesting changes in like the patterns of features firing. I think these are most interesting for like attention features. So like SAEs trained on like output of attention heads and stuff. Um, I think local context features might be particularly useful if we're trying to like reprogram or trying to like leverage like a very nuanced notion of like when the model thinks various concepts apply. Um, um, and then yeah, there's this structure between features that's like evident in um, non-SAE work and in SAE work via like feature splitting. Um, I think that understanding those like might actually be quite useful as well. Like understanding this larger structure. For example, like if we just go back to these like days of the week, um, how would you steer to like convince a model that instead of like Friday, it was like Wednesday? Like you actually need to like rotate around the space. You can't just like add, remove a feature and add it. You could combine like delete Friday, add Wednesday. But if you wanted a nicer operation of like make it think that like the days are several more advanced, you would need a different kind of intervention. And so the structure between features may be quite important for understanding how to correctly intervene in the latent space in like a coherent way. Um, cool. So have I gone massively over time? How are we doing? Yeah. Yeah. I'm, I'm happy to go through the questions, but if I can take like 30 seconds just to tell people about AZ. Useful. Um, so if you click on my name, you can see I'm now looking at the slide for where I'm like advertising the White Box Evals team. So yeah, so I'm hiring for I think about three maybe four roles. Mostly like research scientists, engineers. I like wouldn't like if you think you're one of those category and you're not sure which, this doesn't really matter. I'm looking for really talented people. It is in person in London. We're gonna have a fairly broad like mandate. We're the first mech interp team at AZ. We are planning to do all kinds of things with probes, with like model organisms, like backdoored models. Um, all, Basically, we're going to be looking for where mech can be useful, and we're going to try to have very strong baselines of like alternative methods. And we're going to work very closely with people who are trying to achieve AI safety outcomes and give ourselves assurances about things or know how to audit for various things. And we're going to work very closely with labs, and our work feeds into governance. Our work feeds into just creating technical solutions that will like give us assurances for humanity. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Like there are a number of people who have turned down job offers at labs to work at AZ. We have the guy who invented our studio. We have like the guy who we have people who are like very involved in like creating the Pythia suite of models. We've got people who are like formerly, like top dogs at like Microsoft and very very critical engineers from a lot of really cool labs are like working there. So you would really be surrounded by very fantastic scientists and very fantastic engineers. And I think we're going to do a lot of very cool stuff. So please apply. There's a QR code there. It's interpretability researcher. You could Google UKAZ. Um, cool. I will maybe take questions now. I know it. Yeah. So the logit weight distributions um are direct logit attribution. Like that's how we get those. Um in this case, yeah, yeah, no, you can totally get that. They are direct logit attribution. I guess like there's like details there, but if you look into it, I think you'll see that it's that's what it is. Um cool. And then um do you have a perspective on how robustness and interpretability can inform each other? More specifically, can SEs uncover latents that contribute to model non-robustness? I'm just gonna like sit on the slide of like applications, which I skipped. I think like yes, interpretability um, might be able to uncover latents that I'm not really sure what you mean contribute to model non-robustness. What we can do is we can like take cases of where models have been jailbroken, and we can look at what latents were involved. And to the extent that there are latents which like naturally track, sorry, the model naturally tracks when it's being jailbroken, there will be latents that track the corresponding features. It's not like super clear that there's like um a huge advantage from doing this with interpretability, but I don't think anyone's like done a super serious job of it. Um, I think another thing here is that like um, sort of like model internals methods, which aren't interpretability based, probably have a lot to offer in terms of robustness. So like automated red teaming, or like latent adversarial like methods are like probably quite exciting there. Doing interpretability of the like methods that are like so if you use SGD to like find a latent that's a good perturbation to the activations to jailbreak a model, and then you interpret it after the fact, that might be quite useful. Uh, Hopefully that was useful. Does That's okay. Does AC still hire through DCIT? I applied in the past, went through all the interviews, then got no response. Yes, so AC sits within the Department of Science, Innovation, and Technology. Not getting a response seems like weird. And my guess is there's like a mistake has been made, or like in general, I think we respond to everyone. So my apologies for that. If this was for the interpretability role, I can like directly go look it up. But if it's not, I would like try to work out who you can email. Um, um, uh, uh, yeah. I'd be quite interested to see what people do in the hackathon. I think this is like the kind of thing that like sharing during your interview process would be quite informative.
Yeah. Thank you for the lecture. And
No worries.
I have two main questions for kind of forward looking. What direction do you see for making essay training more efficient? Because like one criticism is that
Mhm.
yeah, essays are great. It's unsupervised and we can, see a lot of interesting things, but you have to train it on every single layer. And I know like Anthropic has their cross-coder essay training method.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering what kind of like efficient training paradigms you envision in the future. And the
Yeah.
second question is, how do you envision detecting out of distribution behaviors using this method? Because essays trained usually on like web text or pile, and it's
Yeah.
like specific to that data set. But in terms of safety, what we really want is like can, can it explain behavior out of distribution? Something like out in the open when like users or adversarial users might, um, you know,
Yeah.
try try to try to elicit behavior that was not in the training distribution.
Yeah. For the first question, I'm gonna come out like sort of with a fairly strong take here. And I'm sort of this is like me trying to directionally update people. So like I think that training SEs efficiently is like somewhat important, but it is like not really nearly as important as like finding useful things to do with them and understanding how they work. I think
Mhm.
in general, there's been like quite a bit of effort put into this. There's now places like Goodfire, which I think have a huge incentive to like try to work out how to do this efficiently. So I like don't think this is a thing that like I guess like I see it as like super important that like interpretability researchers like spend a lot of time thinking about. Um, yeah, I think there are like questions here like we train SAEs on a bunch of different layers and it's expensive and it's duplicated effort. Like like in terms of the usefulness of SAEs, can you just get away with an SAE at like three-quarters of the way through the model? Does that like give you all the things you need for whatever you're using the SAE for? So I think like the efficiency more comes from like understand what you're using it for and like be able to like not just train 100 SAEs of 100 different fine tuning parameters just so you at least have one latent that tracks a thing. Like a lot of the inefficiency comes from like we're just using shotgun methods because we don't know what we're trying to do. um so those
Do
are a
you
few
think
takes.
Yeah,
Oh,
do
sorry,
you
go
think
on.
that knowing the right level of abstraction, like in terms of feature splitting,
Yeah.
might help make those kind of search more efficient? Because like right now, we don't know what the right
Mhm.
level of analysis is exactly unless we see different layer essays of different expansion factor, and then you say, oh, okay, it's too
Yeah.
split in this
Yeah.
space, but it's like kind of
if
good in this one.
if the value of SAEs comes from surprising you, then
Mhm.
having to like tune parameters or have guesses about the right parameters like defeats the point. If I'm like, oh, I think my feature is basically like this frequent in this data set, then like I don't know. A lot of the value of SEs come from the fact that they're like can surprise you, they're unsupervised, like having to like tweak your one result we had in the absorption work was that different like first letters of words have different frequencies, and the SAEs which best recovered, or the hyperparameters used to train an SAE, like vary depending on like the underlying frequency of the letter. So basically, like you can't tune for more than one feature simultaneously if there are features of like different frequencies. So I think that's like tricky. Sorry, remind me, your second question was about out of distribution generalization for SAEs. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure, sure. I'm happy to hang around if there's like a place I can just sit and answer questions that's not here. But yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No worries. People should feel free to reach out to me on the open source Mecinterp Slack, which I can like put a link in here. It's usually where I'm most accessible. Um, Sorry, Jason, do you want to remind me what that? Sorry, thanks, Akan. I don't want to hold you around if I'm gonna take questions for a while, but I really appreciate you emceeing here. Thanks. Um, Jason, sorry, I wanted to answer your